The Victorian house at the edge of Eldridge Hollow did not merely stand. It brooded. 3 stories of weathered clapboard and gingerbread trim. Its wraparound porch sagged like a tired mouth holding too many secrets. From the turret window facing west, Elena Rodriguez could watch the sun sink behind the whispering foresta, name the town had given the dense woods that murmured with whines channeled through granite ravines. At 72, Elena found comfort in this daily ritual, the slow extinguishing of light mirroring the gradual dimming of her own world. Below her, the house creaked its complaints. Each groan of timber, each sigh of settling foundation, spoke of the decades it had witnessed. Elena knew these sounds intimately, the particular moan from the 3rd stair when weight touched its center, the rhythmic tapping of the loose shutter in the northeast bedroom when the autumn winds blew, the persistent drip in the butler's pantry that Tomas kept meaning to fix. Abuela. Samuel's voice, still carrying the high notes of childhood but beginning to deepen, floated up the staircase. Lucia says dinner is almost ready. Elena turned from the window, her knuckles white where they gripped the sill. The arthritis had been particularly vicious today, the damp autumn air seeping into her joints like cold betrayal. Dal Cuyabayo, Samuelito. She heard his quick footsteps retreating light, eager. Everything a 12-year-old's footsteps should be. Samuel was the single uncomplicated joy in her life, her biological grandson, born to Lucia during that reckless year she'd spent with a musician from Hartford who disappeared before Samuel's first tooth appeared. Elena had stepped in when Lucia's interest flagged, which was often. She'd changed diapers, warmed bottles, walked colicky nights while Lucia slept or went out to find herself, a search that apparently required expensive cocktails and new clothing. The stairs protested as Elena descended, each step measured. She paused at the family gallery lining the stairwell, photographs of weddings, christenings, graduations, frozen smiles that didn't reach eyes. There was Marcos, her late husband, looking perpetually surprised by the camera's flash. There she was beside him on their wedding day, 25 years his junior, already wearing the cautious expression of someone who'd traded youth for security. And there was Lucia at 16, glaring at the photographer as if the camera had personally offended her. The kitchen bloomed with conflicting aromas, garlic and onion, sizzling in olive oil, but beneath it, the acrid scent of something burning. Lucia stood at the stove, her back rigid, a silk blouse to find for cooking clinging to sharp shoulders. "You're late," Lucia said without turning. The sunset was particularly beautiful tonight. Elena settled at the heavy oak table, its surface scarred by generations of meals. "Where's Tomas?" "Working late, again." Lucia's voice dripped with derision. Something about quarter-end reports, as if numbers matter more than family dinner. Samuel slid into the chair beside Elena, his knee bouncing beneath the table. "Can I be excused after dinner? Miguel wants to show me his new drone." "Homework first," Elena said gently. Lucia slammed a pot on the burner. "Let the boy have some fun." "Elena, not everyone needs to be buried in books every waking moment." The familiar tension stretched between them, thin and sharp as wire. Elena said nothing, watching as Lucia plated the chicken overcooked. The skin blackened at the edges. This was the dance they'd perfected over 2 decades. Lucia's provocations met with Elena's silence, a battle fought in the negative space between words. They ate in a silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Samuel divided his attention between his food and his phone under the table, a slight smile playing on his lips as he exchanged messages with his friend. "Samuel, no phones at the table." Elena's voice was firm but not unkind. "Sorry, abuela." He slipped the device into his pocket. Lucia's knife scraped loudly against her plate. "He's just being a normal kid. You'd have him reading Kant by candlelight if you could." "Reading never hurt anyone," Elena said quietly. "Unlike some distractions." Lucia's eyes flashed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Elena could respond, headlights swept across the kitchen window. Tomas was home. He entered like a ghost, quiet, tentative, as if unsure of his welcome. At 45, Tomas still had the boyish softness around his eyes that had first attracted Lucia. But now it looked less like youth and more like weariness. His suit, charcoal gray and impeccably pressed, seemed to hang on him as though he'd recently lost weight. "Sorry I'm late," he murmured, placing his briefcase by the door. "The Henderson account ... double quotes, comma. We saved you a plate." Elena rose, but Lucia was already at the microwave, reheating the food with unnecessary force. Tomas kissed the top of Samuel's head, then hesitated before approaching Lucia. She offered her cheek, the gesture so perfunctory it might have been a business transaction. He took his seat, unfolding his napkin with precise movements. "How was school, Sam?" "Good. We started pre-algebra." Tomas managed a tired smile. "Already? I didn't get to algebra until 8th grade." "Times change," Lucia said, setting his plate before him with a clatter. Unlike some people, the rest of the meal passed in excruciating politeness. Tomas asked about Elena's arthritis. Lucia complained about the rising cost of everything. Samuel asked to be excused, and when Elena nodded, he disappeared upstairs, the thunder of his footsteps echoing through the house. When the dishes were cleared, Elena washing, Lucia drying with exaggerated slowness, Tomas retreated to his study, the room that had been Marcos's before him. Elena watched him go, noticing the new stoop in his shoulders. "He looks tired," she said. Lucia snorted. "He's always tired. He's tired of life, tired of me." Elena chose her words carefully, the way one might navigate a floor littered with broken glass. "Perhaps if there were less tension in the house ... double quotes. The tension is your creation, Elena. Always watching, always judging." Lucia threw the towel on the counter. "You've never accepted me, not really. I was just the baggage that came with Marcos." That's not true. But even as Elena said it, she wondered, had she ever truly embraced Lucia? Or had she merely tolerated her for Marcos's sake, and later, for Samuel's? "Save it." Lucia poured herself a glass of wine, the deep red liquid catching the light like blood. "I'm going to bed. Don't wait up." Elena listened as her stepdaughter's footsteps receded, then the click of her bedroom door. The house settled into its nighttime sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the sigh of the furnace kicking on, the distant hoot of an owl in the woods. She found Tomas in his study, bent over spreadsheets, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. "Tomas," she said softly from the doorway. He looked up, blinking as if emerging from deep water. "Elena, come in." She took the chair opposite his desk, the leather cool through her dress. "You're working too hard." "Someone has to." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The numbers, they're not adding up, Elena." "What do you mean?" For a moment, he seemed to consider unburdening himself. She saw the weight of it in his eyes, the terrible loneliness of carrying a secret too heavy for one person. But then he shook his head, replaced his glasses, and the moment passed. Just the usual end of quarter stress. Nothing to worry about. But she did worrying. She worried as she climbed the stairs to her room on the 2nd floor. She worried as she changed into her nightgown, the fabric soft from countless washings. She worried as she took her nightly pill, the small white tablet that promised sleep but rarely delivered. More than a foggy approximation. From her window, she could see a light still burning in Samuel's room. She smiled, knowing he was probably reading under the covers with a flashlight, the way she'd done as a girl in Mexico City so many lifetimes ago. Down the hall, Lucia's room was dark, but as Elena watched, a tiny orange glow appeared at the window, the tip of a cigarette. Lucia had quit years ago, or so she claimed. Elena crawled into bed, the sheets cold. The house groaned around her, as if shifting in its own uneasy sleep. Somewhere below, a floorboard creaked. Tomas, perhaps, getting a glass of water. Or maybe it was just the house, remembering all the footsteps that had traveled its halls, all the secrets it had absorbed into its timber and plaster. She closed her eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change, of endings, of long-buried things rising to the surface. The autumn sun, weak and pale, filtered through the stained glass transom above the Rodriguez front door, casting jewel-toned shadows on the foyer floor. It was Saturday, and the house buzzed with the tense energy of forced normalcy. In the kitchen, Elena rolled out dough for empanadas, the rhythmic motion of the rolling pin a meditation. Samuel sat at the table, textbook spread before him, chewing on the end of his pencil. "Abuela, why did you and Abuelo Marcos get married?" The question, so innocent, so casually devastating. Elena kept her eyes on the dough, watching it stretch and thin. "He was a good man, kind. He offered me stability after a difficult time." "What about love?" She smiled, though it felt tight on her face. "Love comes in many forms, Samuelito. Sometimes it grows slowly, like a tree. Other times it arrives suddenly, like a storm." "Did you love my mom's real dad?" Elena paused, flour dusting her hands like premature age spots. "I never met him. He was gone before you were born. Mom says he was a musician, that he played guitar in clubs in Hartford. So I heard." Samuel abandoned his homework, coming to stand beside her. "Can I help?" She showed him how to fill the circles of dough with picadillo, how to fold and crimp the edges. His small fingers, still clumsy with youth, fumbled at first, but soon he produced a passable empanada. "You have your grandfather's hands," Elena said softly. "He was good with delicate work. Abuelo Tomas says I should learn a trade. That college isn't for everyone." Elena's jaw tightened. "Education is always valuable. Your grandfather Marcos believed that. He didn't have the opportunity, but he made sure Lucia went to university. Mom says she wasted it, that she studied art history and now she can't even get a job at the museum." Before Elena could respond, Lucia swept into the kitchen, dressed in workout clothes that looked never worn, her hair pulled into a severe ponytail. "What's this?" "Cooking lessons. Samuel is helping me," Elena said evenly. "Shouldn't he be outside? It's a beautiful day." Lucia opened the refrigerator, stared inside as if expecting it to reveal some secret, then closed it again. "Where's Tomas?" "Garden shed," Samuel said, fixing the lawnmower. Lucia made a sound halfway between a sigh and a groan. "Of course. Saturday. And he'd rather talk to machinery than people." She poured herself coffee, black, in a mug that read "World's Okayest Stepmom," a gift from Samuel last Christmas that Elena suspected had been chosen with more accuracy than affection. "He works hard all week," Elena said. "Perhaps he enjoys the quiet. Perhaps he enjoys avoiding me." Lucia leaned against the counter, watching them. "You know, Elena, you're creating a mama's boy. Samuel needs to be with other kids, not learning to cook like an old woman." "Cooking is a life skill," Elena said, her voice dangerously calm. "And Samuel spends plenty of time with friends. Don't you, Mio?" Samuel nodded, his eyes darting between the two women. He had developed this habit recently, watching, assessing, as if trying to anticipate the next volley in their endless, quiet war. The back door opened, and Tomas entered, smelling of gasoline and cut grass. His hands were streaked with grease. The carburetor shot. "I'll need to order a part." "More money," Lucia muttered. Tomas ignored her, washing his hands at the sink. "Smells good in here." Elena's turning Samuel into her little helper. "Next he'll be crocheting doilies." "There are worse things." Tomas dried his hands, then placed one on Samuel's shoulder. "How's the homework?" "Almost done." "Good man." Tomas's eyes met Elena's over Samuel's head. There was something in his gaze, a warning, or perhaps an apology. "Lucia, I need to talk to you." "In my study." Lucia's eyebrows arched. "How formal." "Can't it wait?" I was about to go for a run. Now, please." The shift in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Even Samuel noticed, looking up from his empanada with curiosity. Lucia sighed dramatically but followed Tomas out of the kitchen. Their footsteps faded down the hall, then the study door clicked shut. Samuel looked at Elena. "Are they fighting?" "Just talking, sweetheart." But Elena's hands had stilled on the dough. She wiped them on her apron. "Why don't you take these outside to bake? The sun will do you good." Once Samuel was gone, basket of empanadas in hand, Elena moved quietly down the hall. She told herself she wasn't eavesdropping, merely passing by on her way to the laundry room, but she paused outside the study door, her heart beating an uncomfortable rhythm against her ribs. Double quotes ... Can single quotes "D keep doing this, Lucia?" Tomas's voice, strained but firm. "The credit card statements came yesterday. $5,000 at Nordstrom. A $300 dinner at Le Bernardin. In Hartford. I needed clothes. And business dinners. You know that. Business for what, exactly? You don't have a job, Lucia. You haven't had one in years. So now I'm a burden. After everything I gave up for this family." "What did you give up?" The pain in Tomas's voice was palpable even through the door. "You gave up nothing. I gave up my dream of teaching to take over Marcos's firm because you wanted the money. I moved into this house because you couldn't bear to leave your childhood home. I've spent 20 years trying to make you happy, and it's never enough. Don't be dramatic, Tomas. It doesn't suit you. The money has to stop. I've taken out a second mortgage already. The firm isn't doing well. Small-town accounting practices are dying. Lucia, everyone uses software now. So get better clients. Be more aggressive. It's not that simple." A fist hitting wood, making Elena jump. "We could lose the house? Is that what you want?" Silence, thick and heavy. Then Lucia's voice, cold as January ice. "You wouldn't dare. This is my house. My father left it to me." "Actually," Tomas said. And now his voice held a terrible, quiet certainty. "He left it to you and Elena jointly. Which means we could force a sale. Split the proceeds. Maybe that's what we should do." "You bastard." The words were a hiss. "After everything I've put up with. Your boring little life. You're pathetic." "Enough." Tomas cut her off. "I've set up a separate account for household expenses. Your cards are canceled. If you need money, you'll have to ask me. And you'll have to justify it." The door flew open so suddenly that Elena had no time to move. Lucia stood framed in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. For a heartbeat, their eyes met Elena's wide with surprise and guilt. Lucia's narrowing in understanding. "Eavesdropping, Elena. How typical." Lucia pushed past her, storming down the hall and up the stairs. A moment later, a door slammed hard enough to make the walls tremble. Tomas appeared in the doorway, looking 10 years older than he had at breakfast. "Elena, I'm sorry you had to hear that. She's spending that much." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in disheveled spikes. "It's been going on for years. I kept thinking she'd stop, that it was just a phase. But it's getting worse. And now there are other things." "What other things?" But he shook his head, retreating into the study. "I shouldn't have said anything. It's between Lucia and me." Elena stood in the hallway long after he'd closed the door. The house felt different suddenly, as if the argument had shifted its foundations, revealing cracks she'd chosen not to see. From outside came the sound of Samuel's laughter as he played with the dog, a pure, uncomplicated sound that seemed to belong to another world entirely. She returned to the kitchen, but the dough had formed a crust, irredeemable. She balled it up, threw it away. Through the window over the sink, she watched Samuel chasing the dog around the yard, his limbs loose and joyful. Soon enough, childhood ended. Soon enough, the weight of family settled on those young shoulders. The stairs creaked. Lucia descended, now dressed in expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater. Her face carefully composed, makeup reapplied. She carried a small overnight bag. "I'm going to Hartford," she announced to no one in particular. "I need some space." "What about Samuel?" Elena asked. "What about him? You're always so eager to play mother." "Have at it." Lucia didn't look at her as she strode to the front door. "I'll be back tomorrow. Or Monday. Whenever." The door closed behind her. A moment later, a car engine roared to life, tires spraying gravel as she accelerated down the drive. Tomas emerged from his study, watching through the window as the car disappeared. "She max out whatever cards he has left," he said quietly. "She do it just to prove she can." "Why do you stay?" The question escaped before Elena could stop it. Tomas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Where would I go?" He returned to his study, leaving Elena alone with the silence, and the dying light, and the terrible knowledge that something in the house had broken today. Something that could not be fixed with apologies or time. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Elena took her pill earlier than usual. Sleep, when it came, was thin and troubled. She dreamed of running through the whispering forest, her feet tangling in roots that reached up like skeletal hands. Behind her, someone called her name. But when she turned, there was only darkness, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the path she'd traveled. She woke with a start, her heart hammering. The clock read to 17 a.m. The house was quiet to quiet. She rose, pulling her robe around her, and moved to the window. Outside, the moon was a sliver, offering little light. The yard lay in shadows, the garden shed a darker blot against the night. And there, by the edge of the woods, a figure stood perfectly still. Elena blinked, her eyes adjusting. The figure was tall, slim, Lucia. But no, Lucia was in Hartford. At least, that's what she'd said. As Elena watched, the figure turned slowly, as if sensing her observation. Though she couldn't make out features at this distance, she had the distinct impression it was looking directly at her. Through the dark, through the glass, into the very heart of her. Then it melted back into the trees, becoming one with the shadows. Elena stood at the window until her legs ached and dawn began to bleed pink at the edges of the sky. She told herself it had been a trick of the light, or remnant of her dream. But deep in her bones, she knew something had been out there, watching, waiting. The house groaned its agreement, as if sharing a secret too terrible for words. Note: this completes the first 2 chapters, establishing characters, setting, and initial tensions. The story would continue through approximately 40 more chapters of similar length, following the plot outlined: Tomas's murder, Lucia's framing of Elena, the trial, Elena's imprisonment, Samuel's investigation years later, Lucia's confession, and Elena's exoneration. Hartford's skyline was a charcoal sketch against a bruised purple sky when Lucia finally returned 3 days later. The house had settled into an uneasy calm during her absence, a fragile peace woven from shared meals with Samuel, Tomas's quiet gratitude for the lack of tension, and Elena's unspoken dread of the inevitable return. The Mercedes convertible, a relic of Marcos's brief midlife crisis era, crunched onto the gravel drive. Just past 9 p.m., Elena watched from the parlor window as Lucia emerged, her silhouette sharp in the porch light. She didn't slink. She disembarked like a queen returning from a campaign, a new shopping bag dangling from her wrist. The front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke. Lucia dropped her keys on the hall table with a metallic clatter that echoed through the quiet house. Tomas appeared at the study door, a ledger in his hand. "You're back." Observant as ever, Lucia's smile was a razor cut. She hung her coat, taking her time. "House still standing?" "No one burned it down in my absence. We managed." Tomas's voice was flat. "Samuel missed you." "Did he?" Lucia's gaze slid past him to where Elena stood in the parlor archway. "Or did he just have one less person telling him what to do?" Elena felt the familiar anger, hot and quick, but she banked it. "He asked for you at bedtime." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Lucia's eyes, something that might have been regret or pain. It was gone before Elena could name it. Well, he's asleep now. So all's well that ends well. She picked up her bag. I'm exhausted. The city is so draining. Lucia, Tomas's voice stopped her on the stairs. We need to talk about the spending. She didn't turn. Tomorrow, Tomas, my accountant, we'll have a meeting. Schedule it. She disappeared up the stairs. A moment later, her bedroom door closed with a soft, definitive click. Tomas let out a long, weary breath. He looked at Elena, his shoulders slumped. She bought something new. I saw the bag. Let it go for tonight, Elena said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. You can't fight every battle. He nodded, but the defeat in his posture told her the war was already lost in his heart. He retreated to his study, closing the door softly this time. Elena climbed the stairs to check on Samuel. He slept sprawled across his bed, one arm flung over his astronomy textbook. A model of the solar system, half-painted, sat on his desk. She gently extracted the book, smoothed his hair, and pulled the comforter over him. He murmured in his sleep but didn't wake. Back in her room, she prepared for bed, her rituals offering scant comfort. Brush hair 100 strokes. Wash face with cold water. Take the small white pill from the bottle on her nightstand. She paused, the pill resting on her palm. For insomnia, take one at bedtime. Dr. Evans had prescribed them after Marcos died. When the silence of the house became a roar in her ears, they didn't bring sleep so much as a chemical ceasefire with her own thoughts. She swallowed it dry, the chalky taste lingering on her tongue. As she lay in the dark, she listened. The house was a symphony of settling sounds, but beneath it, a new strain, the faint, rhythmic thump of bass from Lucia's room, music, or maybe the television. Elena closed her eyes, willing the pill to work, but instead of oblivion, memories surfaced, not her own, but stories Marcos had told. About Lucia's mother, Isabella, who had died when Lucia was 8. A car accident on a rain-slicked road to Hartford. Marcos, drowning in grief, had poured everything into his daughter, creating a creature of boundless want and bottomless resentment. I spoiled her, he'd confessed to Elena once. Late at night, his breath smelling of brandy. I gave her things instead of love, because things were easier. And now she thinks love is something you buy. The bass throbbed through the floorboards, a persistent, invasive pulse. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the loose shutter, a mournful counterpoint to the music from below. Down the hall, another door opened. Tomas's footsteps, heavy and slow, moved toward Lucia's room. The music cut off abruptly. Muffled voices, too low to decipher. But the tone was clear, accusation met with cold defiance. Then, silence. A deeper, more profound silence than before. As if the house itself was holding its breath. Elena drifted into a shallow, medicated doze. She dreamed of the figure at the edge of the woods. But this time it was closer, standing at the garden gate. It raised a hand, not in threat, but in a slow, beckoning gesture. Come see, it seemed to say. Come see what's buried here. She woke with a gasp, her mouth dry. The digital clock glowed for 03 a.m. The house was utterly still. No music, no voices, not even the usual creaks and groans. It was the silence of a tomb. A sudden, sharp sound shattered the quiet. A crash. From downstairs. Like something heavy and ceramic meeting the floor. Then a voice, choked and guttural, crying out a sound of pure animal shock. Tomas! Elena was out of bed before her mind fully registered the command. Her robe flapping around her legs as she flung open her door. Samuel stood in his doorway, eyes wide with sleep and fear. Abuela, what was that? Stay here, she ordered, her voice sharper than she intended. Lock your door. But, now, Samuel. She didn't wait to see if he obeyed. She hurried down the stairs, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. The foyer was dark. but a blade of yellow light cut across the hall floor from the kitchen doorway. "Tomas!" she called, her voice trembling. No answer. She reached the kitchen doorway and froze. The scene was a still life of domestic horror. Tomas lay on his back near the pantry door, his eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the ceiling. One hand was clutched to his chest, where a dark, wet stain spread across his shirt like a grotesque blossom. A few feet away, the antique letter opener, a silver dagger-shaped piece from Marcos's collection that usually sat on the desk in the study, lay on the floor, its tip glistening under the overhead light. But it was the blood that held Elena transfixed, a slick, dark pool spreading from beneath Tomas, creeping toward the leg of the kitchen table. So much blood. It painted the terracotta tiles, soaked into the rag, smeared across the floorboards where something or someone had dragged. Her mind refused to complete the thought. A movement to her left. Lucia stood by the counter, her back pressed against the cabinets, her hands pressed to her mouth. Her face was a mask of perfect, believable horror. "Elena," she whispered, the word a ragged breath. "Dios mío, what did you do?" The accusation hung in the air, mingling with the coppery scent of blood. I just came down," Elena stammered, her mind reeling. "I heard a crash. I heard you arguing." Lucia's voice rose, sharp with hysteria. "From upstairs. I heard you screaming at him. About the money, about the house. And then this." She gestured wildly at Tomas's body, then her eyes fixed on Elena's hands. Elena looked down. Her own hands were clean, but in her shock, she had taken a step forward. The edge of her robe now brushed the outermost edge of the blood pool, the fabric wicking up a dark stain. "You." Lucia's eyes widened further, a performance of dawning, terrible realization. "You killed him. You killed Tomas." "No," the denial tore from Elena's throat. "Lucia, what are you saying? I just got here." But Lucia was already in motion, backing away, shaking her head. "Stay away from me. Stay back." She fumbled behind her, grabbed the wall phone, her fingers jabbing at the numbers. "Police, we need the police. There's been a murder." Elena stood frozen, caught in the nightmare. Her gaze dropped to Tomas's face. In death, he looked surprised. His lips parted as if to ask a final, unanswered question. A single drop of blood had traced a path from the corner of his mouth to his jaw. A dark tear. Sirens, distant at first, then swelling, piercing the quiet of Eldridge Hollow. Blue and red lights strobed through the kitchen windows, painting the scene in garish, alternating colors. The world had narrowed to this: the body on the floor, the blood on her robe, the triumphant, terrified gleam in her stepdaughter's eyes, and the terrible, dawning understanding that she was no longer a witness. She was the accused. Detective Harlan. Reed had seen many things in his 28 years with the Eldridge Hollow PD, but the scene in the Rodriguez kitchen lodged itself in his memory with the clarity of a photograph. The old woman in the blood-stained robe, standing statue still over the body. The younger woman, beautiful and trembling near the phone, her story already spilling out in frantic, coherent bursts. And the boy, a pale-faced ghost at the top of the stairs, peering through the banisters, until an officer gently led him away. Reed was a methodical man, built like a retired linebacker gone slightly to seed. He took in the details, the placement of the body, the blood spatter on the lower cabinets, the letter opener discarded carelessly, the overturned teacup on the table, its contents seeping into the wood grain. "She did it," Lucia sobbed into a tissue provided by a young patrol officer. "My stepmother. She's always been jealous. Of me, of Tomas, of our life. She wanted the house for herself. She and Tomas argued tonight, I heard them. About money. She was screaming that he was a leech, that he was ruining the family." Elena, wrapped in a blanket an officer had placed over her shoulders, could only shake her head. "It's not true. I was asleep. I heard the crash and came down. She was already here." Reed's eyes, the color of wet slate, moved between them. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your hands." Elena held them out. They were clean, but trembling violently. "We'll need to take swabs," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. Standard procedure. The forensic team moved with quiet efficiency. A dance of evidence collection around the still form of Tomas. Photographs flashed, freezing the horror in stark relief. They bagged the letter opener, collected the teacup and the broken saucer that had caused the crash. "Detective," one of the techs, a woman with severe glasses, beckoned Reed to the pantry. She pointed to the floor. "Drag marks from near the table to the stairs. And look here," she indicated a faint, smudged footprint in a thinner part of the blood, small, narrow, consistent with a woman's bare foot or a slipper. Reed looked back at Elena's feet, clad in fuzzy slippers. They appeared clean. Lucia wore socks. "We'll need both women's footwear for comparison," he said. It was then that the other tech called out from near the table. "Detective, found something." He held up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside were a few white, powdery crumbs. On the floor by the teacup. Could be nothing. Could be something. Reed took the bag, holding it up to the light. He looked at Elena. "Mrs. Rodriguez, do you take any medication?" "She and Tomas argued tonight, I heard them. About money." She was screaming that he was a leech, that he was ruining the family. Elena, wrapped in a blanket an officer had placed over her shoulders, could only shake her head. "It's not true. I was asleep. I heard the crash and came down. She was already here." Reed's eyes, the color of wet slate, moved between them. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your hands." Elena held them out. They were clean, but trembling violently. "We'll need to take swabs," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. Standard procedure. The forensic team moved with quiet efficiency. A dance of evidence collection around the still form of Tomas. Photographs flashed, freezing the horror in stark relief. They bagged the letter opener, collected the teacup and the broken saucer that had caused the crash. "Detective," one of the techs, a woman with severe glasses, beckoned Reed to the pantry. She pointed to the floor. "Drag marks from near the table to the stairs. And look here," she indicated a faint, smudged footprint in a thinner part of the blood, small, narrow, consistent with a woman's bare foot or a slipper. Reed looked back at Elena's feet, clad in fuzzy slippers. They appeared clean. Lucia wore socks. "We'll need both women's footwear for comparison," he said. It was then that the other tech called out from near the table. "Detective, found something." He held up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside were a few white, powdery crumbs. On the floor by the teacup. Could be nothing. Could be something. Reed took the bag, holding it up to the light. He looked at Elena. "Mrs. Rodriguez, do you take any medication?" The question seemed innocuous, but Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blanket. "For arthritis. And for sleep. Would that be temazepam?" She nodded, her throat tight. "And where do you keep this medication?" "On my nightstand." Reed glanced at an officer, who nodded and headed upstairs. Lucia let out a fresh, gasping sob. "Her pills." "Oh my God," Tomas was complaining about being unable to sleep lately. "You don't think?" She left the horrific suggestion hanging. The officer returned, holding Elena's prescription bottle. It was half empty. Reed compared it to the evidence bag. The pills were the same small, white ovals. "We'll need to test the tea residue," Reed said, his voice grave. He turned to Elena. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station. We need to get a formal statement. Am I under arrest?" The words were a whisper. "Not yet. We're just talking." But the look in his eyes told a different story. As two officers gently guided Elena toward the door, she turned back. Lucia was watching her, the tissue held to her face. But over the crumpled paper, their eyes met. And in that brief, unguarded moment, Elena saw it. Not grief, not shock, but a cold, calculating satisfaction. Then Lucia's face crumpled again into the mask of the grieving widow, and she turned into the shoulder of the female officer. her body racked with manufactured sobs. Outside, the cold autumn air was a slap. Neighbors stood on their porches, wrapped in robes, their faces illuminated by the pulsating police lights. Elena kept her head down, the blanket pulled tight, but she could feel their eyes on her, hear the sibilant whisper of speculation. As the patrol car pulled away, she looked back at the house. In Samuel's window, a small, pale face peered down. She raised a hand, a feeble wave of reassurance he did not feel. Then the car turned the corner, and the house, her home, her prison, the keeper of all her secrets, disappeared from view. The interview room at the Eldridge-Hollow police station was a study in beige austerity. The walls were scuffed, the table bore coffee rings, and the air smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Detective Reed sat across from her, his bulk making the plastic chair seem like a child's toy. "Tell me, in your own words, what happened tonight, Mrs. Rodriguez." Elena told him. The pill, the dose, the crash, finding Tomas, finding Lucia. She kept her voice as even as she could, though it threatened to break when she described Tomas's eyes. Reed listened, taking sparse notes. When she finished, he leaned back. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you and Tomas had an argument recently, didn't you? About family finances." "A discussion, not an argument. Earlier this week." "And were you angry with him?" "I was concerned for the family, concerned enough to confront him tonight." "I didn't confront him. I was asleep." Reed opened a folder, sliding a photograph across the table. It was the letter opener, in close-up. "This is yours?" "It was my husband's. It stays on the desk in the study. A place you have access to." "It's my house." "Of course I have access. Your fingerprints are on it. I've handled it many times. Too dust to move it." Reed nodded slowly, as if this were a reasonable, expected answer. He slid another photo. "The teacup. Tomas often had tea at night. Sometimes chamomile, to help him sleep. But he was having trouble sleeping, according to your stepdaughter. Enough that he might have taken one of your pills. Did you ever offer them to him?" "Never. They're strong. They're for me. But if he were desperate, if he took one without your knowledge, ground it up, put it in his tea, it might make him drowsy, vulnerable." Elena stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the preliminary test on the tea. Residue came back positive for temazepam, your sleep medication, and the medical examiner's initial assessment suggests Tomas was sedated before he was stabbed. The wound pattern indicates he didn't put up much of a fight. The room seemed to tilt. Someone else put it there. Lucia, she must have. Lucia Rodriguez has an alibi for the early part of the evening. Her phone records show she was on a call with a friend in Hartford from 10 p.m. until nearly midnight. The call ended about 15 minutes before you say you heard the crash. She could have done it after. The timeline is tight, Mrs. Rodriguez, and she's his wife. What motive would she have? Money? Debt? She's been spending recklessly. Tomas was cutting her off. He told me." Reed's expression remained impassive. "We'll look into the finances, of course. But right now, the physical evidence is pointing in one direction. Your fingerprints on the weapon, your medication in his system, a witnessed argument about money, and you standing over the body with his blood on your clothing." He let the words hang in the sterile air. "I didn't do this," Elena said, but the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "Then help me understand, Mrs. Rodriguez, who did?" She had no answer. Only a growing, icy certainty that a trap had been sprung, and she had walked right into it. After hours of questioning, they released her, pending further investigation. A young officer drove her back to the house just as dawn was breaking, staining the sky the color of a fading bruise. The police tape across the front door was a bright, cheerful yellow that mocked the darkness within. The officer helped her inside. The house was cold, empty. The kitchen was still a crime scene, sealed off. The faint, metallic scent of blood lingered in the air. Samuel was gone. A note on the hall table, in Lucia's dramatic script, read, "Taken Samuel to the Hampton Inn. Can't have him in a house of murder. The police have our statements." Elena climbed the stairs, each step an effort. In her room, the prescription bottle was gone from her nightstand. The entire room felt violated, searched. She went to the window, looking out at the woods where she had seen the figure. Had it been real? Or a premonition? Down the hall, the door to Lucia's room stood ajar. Against her better judgment, Elena pushed it open. The room was a tornado of luxury silk, cashmere, shopping bags from stores Elena could never afford. On the dressing table, amidst a litter of cosmetics, something caught her eye. A small, silver earring shaped like a dagger. Its mate was missing. Elena had never seen it before. But Tomas, in one of his rare moments of confiding, had mentioned it months ago. Lucia lost an earring at that charity gala. Made a huge scene. It was a gift from some admirer, I think. She picked it up, the metal cold against her skin. A gift from an admirer, a secret. She heard a car on the gravel. Peering out, she saw a sleek black sedan she didn't recognize. A man in a dark coat got out, looked up at the house, then headed for the front door. The doorbell rang, insistent. Elena pocketed the earring, a tiny, cold secret of her own, and went to answer it, the weight of the coming storm settling on her frail shoulders. The man on the doorstep was in his late 40s, with a kind of tan that spoke of golf courses rather than beaches, and a suit that cost more than Elena's car. He held out a business card with fingers adorned by a heavy, gold signet ring. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Robert Thorne. I'm an attorney. I believe your stepdaughter, Lucia, has retained my services regarding the unfortunate events. May I come in?" His voice was smooth, polished, devoid of any regional accent, a carefully crafted neutral. Elena stepped back wordlessly, allowing him entry. He brought the scent of expensive cologne and ambition into the foyer. "My condolences for your loss," he said, though his eyes were already assessing the house. "Its value, its potential. This is a beautiful home. Pre-Civil War, if I'm not mistaken. What do you want, Mr. Thorne?" He smiled, a thin stretching of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Straight to the point. "I admire that. Mrs. Rodriguez. Lucia is naturally devastated. She's also concerned about her safety and the safety of her son. Samuel is my grandson, of course, but legally, his mother is his guardian. And given the circumstances, she feels it's best if he remains with her, away from this house. She also feels it would be inappropriate for you to have contact with him during the police investigation." Elena felt as if the floor had dropped away. "She can't do that. I'm afraid she can. And she has. I've already filed the necessary paperwork for a temporary protective order, pending the outcome of the investigation into Tomas's death. You are not to approach or contact Samuel Rodriguez." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you are the primary suspect in a violent homicide, and that your presence constitutes a potential danger to a minor child." He said it without inflection, as if reading a weather report. "The hearing is tomorrow morning at family court. I would suggest you retain your own counsel." He handed her a folded sheaf of papers. The words blurred before her eyes. "Petition for temporary custody. Risk of harm. This is Lucia's doing," Elena whispered, the truth of it a physical pain. "She's using my grandson to punish me." Thorne's expression remained professionally blank. "My client is acting in the best interests of her child during a traumatic time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to meet with Detective Reed. We'll be pushing for a swift resolution to this case. For everyone's sake." He left as quietly as he had come, the door clicking shut with finality. Elena stood in the silent foyer, the legal papers cold in her hands. The battle lines were not just drawn, they were fortified. Lucia wasn't merely framing her for murder. She was systematically dismantling her life, piece by piece. She needed a lawyer. But who? Marcos's old firm was defunct, absorbed by a larger practice in Hartford. Tomas had been the family accountant, not a litigator. She was adrift. The name came to her from a distant memory. Mateo Ruiz. She'd read about him in the local paper maybe a year ago. A young attorney, fresh out of some prestigious law school, had opened a practice in town. He'd won some small case against the town council. Something about historic preservation. He'd been quoted saying, "Even the little guy deserves a fierce defense." It had seemed naive, quaint. Now, it seemed like a lifeline. She found his number online. His office was above the bakery on Main Street. When she called, a young, cheerful voice answered. "Law offices of Mateo Ruiz, Isabella speaking. I need to speak with Mr. Ruiz. It's urgent." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ruiz is in court this morning. Can I take a message?" Elena left her name and number, her hope already deflating. He would call back, hear what she was accused of, and decline. Who would want this case? A messy, small-town murder with a grandmother as the suspect. She spent the day in a purgatory of stillness. The police had taken her slippers, her robe. The kitchen was sealed. She made tea in the microwave in the parlor, the hum of the appliance loud in the quiet. Reporters had begun to gather at the end of the drive, kept back by a lone patrol car. Their cameras looked like the unblinking eyes of predators. The phone rang in the afternoon. It was Mateo Ruiz. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I got your message. I have to be honest, I've heard about your situation. Then you know I need help." There was a pause on the line. She could picture him young, idealistic, weighing the professional suicide of, representing her against, whatever principles had driven him to law school. "Can you come to my office? Say 4 o'clock? "Yes. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Rodriguez. We're just going to talk." The law office was exactly as she'd imagined, small, slightly shabby, but clean and bright. Law books lined one wall, their spines cracked. Diplomas from Yale Law School hung slightly crooked behind the desk. Mateo Ruiz was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with dark, earnest eyes and hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He stood as she entered, gesturing to a chair. "Mrs. Rodriguez, please sit. Can I get you some water, coffee?" "No, thank you." He sat, leaning forward, his elbows on the desk. "I've spoken briefly with Detective Reed. I've seen the initial evidence report. It's substantial. I didn't kill Tomas." "I believe you." He said it simply, without drama. Elena blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because people who commit premeditated murder usually try to hide the body or flee the scene. They don't call the police and stand there waiting in a blood-stained robe. And because Detective Reed's case, while tidy, feels too tidy. Like a story someone wrote and then arranged the props to match." Her eyes welled with tears for the first time since the nightmare began. This young man, a stranger, had seen in minutes what the police had missed. "But belief isn't proof," he continued, his expression turning grave. "The physical evidence is damning. Your prints on the weapon, your drugs in his system, your financial motive, and your stepdaughter is a compelling witness with a seemingly solid alibi. The prosecution, and it will be Elena Vargas. She's ruthless, will paint you as a bitter, controlling matriarch who snapped when her meal ticket threatened her hold on the family estate. What can we do? We fight. We poke holes. We find the real story. But I need you to understand something, Mrs. Rodriguez. This will be ugly. Your life, your family's secrets, everything will be dragged into the light. The prosecution will attack your character, your marriage, your relationship with Samuel. It will be brutal. And even if we win, the town may never see you the same way again." Elena looked at her hands, nodded in her lap. She thought of Samuel, confused and frightened, in a hotel room with the woman who had orchestrated this nightmare. She thought of Tomas, his surprised dead eyes. She thought of the silver earring, now hidden in her jewelry box. "I have nothing left to lose, Mr. Ruiz. except my grandson. And my freedom. So we fight." Matteo studied her for a long moment, then nodded, a spark of determination lighting his eyes. "Okay, then first, we deal with family court tomorrow. We fight Lucia's custody petition. A judge is less likely to see you as a monster if you have your own counsel fighting for your rights as a grandmother. Then, we start building our defense. I need you to tell me everything. Every argument, every debt, every secret, every strange look. We need to find Lucia's motive, because I guarantee you, she has one." For the next 2 hours, Elena talked. She told him about the spending, the hidden debts, the argument she'd overheard, Tomas's fear, the figure in the woods, the earring. He took notes, his pen flying across a yellow legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back. "The earring. Do you have it?" She nodded, taking it from her purse and handing it to him. He held it up to the light. "An admirer," he mused. "That could be a motive. If Tomas found out about an affair, it gives Lucia a reason to silence him and to frame you, removing 2 obstacles at once. But her alibi, phone records can be fake, or the call could have been made from elsewhere. We need to dig into her life, her finances, her movements. It's a start." He pocketed the earring in an evidence bag. "I'll have a colleague of mine, a private investigator, look into this." Discreetly, he walked her to the door. The autumn evening was cold, the streetlights casting long shadows. "Get some rest, Mrs. Rodriguez. Tomorrow is the first battle." As she drove home, the emptiness of the house awaited her, a cavern of echoes and accusations. But for the first time since she'd seen Tomas's body, she didn't feel entirely alone. She had an ally, a young, untested David against the Goliath of the state and her stepdaughter's malice. That night, she didn't take a sleeping pill. She sat by her window, watching the woods. The figure did not reappear, but the woods seemed to watch back, holding their secrets close. The hearing the next morning was a swift, brutal affair. The family court judge, an elderly man with tired eyes, listened as Robert Thorne painted Elena as a dangerous, unstable woman caught in the act of murder. Matteo fought hard, arguing that there had been no arrest, only an investigation, that Elena had deep, lifelong bonds with her grandson, that separating them would cause the child further trauma. But the sight of Lucia in the courtroom, dressed in simple, somber black, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief, was a powerful image. Samuel, sitting beside her, looked small and lost, his eyes darting to Elena with a confusion that broke her heart. The judge granted the temporary order. Elena was to have no contact with Samuel until the criminal investigation was resolved. As they left the courtroom, Lucia paused beside her. She leaned in, her perfume a sweet, cloying cloud. "It's for the best, Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Think of Samuel. You wouldn't want him visiting you in prison, would you?" Then she swept past, taking Samuel by the hand, leading him away without letting him look back. Matteo put a hand on Elena's arm. "We'll appeal. We'll get visits." But Elena was watching Samuel's small back disappear through the courthouse doors. She felt the last anchor to her old life slip away. The fight was no longer just about truth or freedom. It was a war for the soul of her grandson, and she was losing.